Oh man, just take me back to the worst fucking year of my life. The NES Classic Edition, a 2016 staple, back when Nintendo didn't do anything. The year before the Nintendo Switch launch. I've talked about this year and the year that preceded it numerous times. 2015 and 2016, they were a bit rough for Nintendo fans. I've been on record of saying Nintendo's 2015 was one of their darkest ages ever. The dark age of Nintendo, if you will. That's not to say there weren't good games that released in 2015, no. It just felt like a year where there was like no hope left for Nintendo. Just the sheer number of bad games they published. Bad to like mediocre games. Games that you were like, the quality threshold was a little lower that year, for some of those releases. And also the games that they did announce in 2015 were like horrible. And it just felt like, we were going into a bit of a lull, as fans of this company. And 2016 was that lull. Like, there was nothing that year. I mean, nothing in the, can also be a synonym for Pokemon Sun and Moon and Fire Emblem Fates. There was definitely stuff to play that year, but it just didn't really feel like a substantial year when we were in it. It just kind of felt like we were waiting for the NX to be announced, and as we were waiting for the NX to be announced, which would then be the Nintendo Switch, there was nothing to do on our Wii U's. Like, we had like Mario and Sonic 2016, but it very much felt like Nintendo had nothing left to offer, Wii U owners and 3DS owners to a similar extent, but not nearly to the same extent. There was still stuff to play, but a lot of it were like just like whatever games. But there was hope at the end of the tunnel. At E3 2016, Nintendo showed off one of the greatest trailers of all time, the Breath of the Wild E3 2016 trailer. Like, honestly, like jaw-dropping, absolutely phenomenal. And the only trailer that was better than it was the trailer that debuted at the Nintendo Switch presentation 2017. That trailer is amazing. The music, visuals, everything. But the E3 2016 trailer for Breath of the Wild, beautiful. I remember before that trailer, I kind of felt like, damn, like, why do I like this company? And then when that trailer debuted, I was like, that's why. But then a couple weeks later, after E3 2016, Nintendo announced something new. The NES Classic Edition. I remember rolling out of bed in the summer of 2016, and saw on my phone, Nintendo's bringing the NES back to retail. Like, that was kind of the headline used. Nintendo's bringing the NES back. Like, okay. I thought it was genuinely like, and this was literally like groggy, like 9 a.m. Scott, waking up and seeing that headline, not understanding what they meant by it, not reading into it, just assuming like I was like, what, the Wii U's doing that bad? You're bringing back the NES, like the original NES? Like, really? Like, what? Like, no, it's the NES Classic Edition. Fundamentally, a plug-and-play version of the original NES. This isn't anything new. Sega and Atari have done very similar products alongside Intellivision, ColecoVision. A lot of those classic game consoles had these smaller miniature replicas with a bunch of built-in games in there and, similar controllers, but all have kind of a cheaper build quality and retailing for around like maybe $40 or something, available at like Walgreens and dollar stores, all that stuff. The thing is, most of those were done by third-party companies, companies that would just like license the names of Sega and Atari and all that and make, these cheapo consoles. They get the job done. I feel like a lot of people are a little too harsh on those systems. I'm not saying they're great, but, they're not really meant for the enthusiasts. They're mainly meant for moms and dads who grew up with these systems that they don't know the difference between bad emulation and good emulation. So it's just like if the Sonic the Hedgehog music is pitched up slightly, they're not gonna notice nor care. They buy those things just as like little cheap, like, oh man, I saw this for $40. Let me show my son what I played when I was a kid. And that's all they're really meant for. But this This is made by Nintendo specifically, and it was retailing for $60 and was launching in November of 2016. This was Nintendo's big holiday item outside of Pokemon Sun and Moon. This was kind of Nintendo's way to, get by the fact that, they were kind of done with the Wii U. The Wii U's only major holiday release was Paper Mario Color Splash. Take that as you will. And they announced the Nintendo Switch later in October 2016, so right before the holidays. So I don't really think many people got a Wii U that Christmas. It's just like, why would you? Just wait a couple months for the Nintendo Switch to come out. But this is a bit of a different story. This is for like a completely different market, and the same market at the same time, because you know damn well everybody wanted this for some goddamn reason. It's like, did I really need this? No, I had literally I could play all of these games. Like, I had all of these games that were included on the NES Classic Edition, like on my Wii U and 3DS and original Wii. But it's like, it's fucking cute! So, yeah, I remember rolling out of bed in that summer of 2016 and seeing that headline, and, I opened it up and I realized, like, oh, so it's like a plug-and-play console. And I saw, hey, it's going to include 30 games. But the problem is, I was like, okay, 30 games, and, like, how many of them are gonna be soccer? Just like 30 copies of soccer. But then I saw the list of games included on the NES Classic Edition, and that excited me. So if we flip this box around, we get pretty much all the games right here. And honestly, the games Nintendo selected are pretty much perfect. I mean, there's some duds in here. I got a legal pad here. We can write them down. I really like these legal pads now. I bought a big stack of them at the grocery store, and I like them. You just do your thing, and then you just rip it off, and then you move on. I love it. So, 30 built-in classic NES games. What are they? First up is Balloon Fight. That's kind of like a Nintendo fan classic. I'm not really sure how popular Balloon Fight really is. I think it's kind of iconic in the sense of like, oh, retro NES stuff. But overall, I think it's kind of like, it's included because it's a Nintendo. It's kind of a cute Nintendo history lesson kind of thing. Not saying Balloon Fight's bad. I really like Balloon Fight. Balloon Fight's one of the few black box NES games that really does hold up. That alongside like Mario 1, Excite Bike, a couple others here and there. Balloon Fight's still really fun to play to this day. But overall, it is a bit, it's kind of higher up on the totem pole just because it was a Nintendo published and developed game. But you know what? Man, I'd say it's probably not showing up on anybody's like top 20 favorite NES games. It might be around the, like 25, 30 range, but I'll write that down as one of the stranger ones, one of the ones that I'm like not really sure if that really constitutes being on this thing. I know I just said how I really like the list of games they included here, and the first one on the list I wrote down on the thou not worthy list. But we followed up with Bubble Bobble. That's a classic. That is like one of the biggest, like, boom, NES games. Everybody knows Bubble Bobble. Castlevania, another classic. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest. I don't get that. They only include one Mega Man. They only include one Double Dragon. They only include, like, one Final Fantasy. Well, I mean, like, Final Fantasy was the only one that released here in North America. But, one Ninja Gaiden. I think most people would probably say Castlevania 3 is the superior one. Castlevania 2 is a little more of the controversial type. That's one of the most controversial, like, sequels of, like, oh, man, what the hell is this game? It has its fan base, and I don't think anybody can actively say, like, oh, man, that game is bad, but, it definitely had a lot of problems. I will put it here, I think it's kind of a strange inclusion. Castlevania 3 would have been a better inclusion, but I think more people remember Castlevania 2. Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr. No Donkey Kong 3 and Donkey Kong Jr. math. Donkey Kong 3, just kind of a, it's just like a bit of a flop of a game right there. It's not bad, but it doesn't really feel like a Donkey Kong game. Donkey Kong Jr. Math, oh no. I think that would have been funny to include. just like, oh yeah, why not? But no, they picked the most important ones there. Double Dragon 2, another good one there. No, Double Dragon 1, which is, I mean, Double Dragon 2, if you're going to include either 1 or 2, I think 2 is the one to do. I think there might be some 1 fans out there. I do not know why I wrote Double Dragon 2. I'm just running on autopilot right now. Dr. Mario! You gotta include Dr. Mario on the NES if you're including, like, a puzzle game or something. There is a puzzle game that they did not include, which, you know, is something where I'm like, really? But we'll get to that when we get to that. Excite Bike, another black box classic. That is, like, the epitome of good early NES games. Final Fantasy, of course, like, Square Enix seems to be a little tricky to work with for some of these things sometimes, so it's really great they got Final Fantasy here. Galaga, so they included Galaga and Pac-Man. I'm pretty sure they kind of included those mainly because, you know, of how iconic those games are. So many people would just buy like a plug and play just because it's like, oh, it says Galaga and Pac-Man is included. Like, those are like the go-to mass market classic arcade games. Ones that everybody is like, oh man, I love Galaga. Oh man, I love Pac-Man. The NES versions aren't like my favorite at all. They're fine. They're completely playable. They're pretty much the same games. I just don't like how they feel and look in comparison to the original arcade games. But you know what? I'm gonna write them down. I'm just gonna say, like, I think they're only really here for, you know, like, marquee value, just because, like, you look on the front of the box and you're like, oh my god, Pac-Man's here! But it's just like, is that really, like, an iconic NES game? That's more of an iconic game that also appeared on the NES. Ghosts and Goblins? I mean, people love Ghosts and Goblins. I'm not really, if I'm gonna play Ghosts and Goblins, I'd probably prefer playing, like, another one other than the NES game, mainly because, like, Jesus Christ. But, you know, hey, it's Ghosts and Goblins, you know, it's an NES classic. Gradius, you could probably pick between, like, Gradius and Life Force when it comes to, like, oh man, big shoot-'em-up games on the NES. But, you know, Gradius, that's great. Ice Climber, all right, on the list it goes. I mean, I already said, like, Balloon Fight was kind of one of those inclusions that, hey, Balloon Fight's a fun game, though it does kind of feel like it gets a couple extra brownie points because it's Nintendo developed and published. Ice Climber has nothing but brownie points. It's not even good to begin with. It's pretty much here just because, like, Ice Climber has been kind of retroactively inducted into this NES classic sphere, where it's like, oh man, you know, everybody loves Ice Climber just because, like, Ice Climbers are in Smash Brothers and people look at them like, oh man, yeah, Ice Climber, I love Ice Climber. Like, no, you don't. Kid Icarus, Kirby's Adventure, awesome. Mario Brothers, oh man. I mean, another one where I'm like, kind of there just because it's a Nintendo mainstay, and it's also like one of Mario's first appearance. Mario's first major appearance outside of the Donkey Kong series. See, that's the main problem. It's just like, Mario Brothers on the NES, dog shit. Controls like garbage. Like, I hate the control in Mario Brothers. I will not find a single person that disagrees with me here. If you want a good version of Mario Brothers, play any of the Mario Game Boy Advance games, like the Mario Advance series, Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. It comes with, you know, a revamped version of Mario Brothers that is just so much better. Kind of just comes down to the controls. The controls are just leagues better in that game. Mario Brothers on NES, man, I'll write it. It's kind of just there because it's Mario, and it's also like, hey, this is part of Nintendo history. But it's just like, I don't know about that one, man. Mega Man 2, I mean, like, if you're gonna pick a Mega Man game, Mega Man 2, obviously. You know, I think, like, there is something to say about, like, Mega Man 6. Mega Man 3 has its fans, you know, like, over 2. Obviously, Mega Man 3 is a great game, but, you know, there's some people that debate between Mega Man 3 and 2. You know, 4 and 5 is where it started to lose some fans a bit, and I think 6 ended the series' reign on the NES very, very well. But 4 and 5, you know, has some, like, naysayers out there, people that are like, oh man, this is where it started to dip in quality. But there's a lot of people that think 4 and 5 are some of the best. I think we can all agree, thank God they didn't include Mega Man 1. Metroid, you got to include Metroid, even if, you know, like, oof, NES Metroid, like, oof. Ninja Gaiden, I think Ninja Gaiden 1 is the one to include. 2 and 3, I don't really, like, care as much about. I think the original Ninja Gaiden is just so iconic compared to the sequels, even if the sequels are pretty good. Pac-Man, already put that into the old dumpster. Punch-Out featuring Mr. Dream. I love Punch-Out, one of my favorite NES games of all time. A lot of people a lot of fake fans, as I like to call it, really hate the fact that this is like not the Punch-Out, not the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. And I'm like, yeah, would it have been great if they could have included the original Mike Tyson's Punch-Out? Of course. Punch-Out was originally released as Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, but once that license expired, Nintendo just re-released the game, scrubbing the Mike Tyson likeness from it and replacing Mike Tyson with a new boxer, fake one called Mr. Dream. I like how they have to specify in the title that it's featuring Mr. Dream. Like, it's just like, guys! Mr. Dream's in the game. I'm like, it's still Punch-Out. Like, is it... You weren't even fighting against Mike Tyson in Punch-Out anyways. He's impossible in the game. Now, it's pretty much Punch-Out with a different final boss. It's not even different, it's just a reskin. Like, come on. Star Tropics, that's a bit of a cool inclusion. I think Star Tropics was always kind of a cult classic. Didn't get like a ton of attention. It's kind of down to the fact that it only released in North America, released later in the NES life. But hey, it's really cool that it's here. It did have a sequel, Zoda's Revenge. I know nothing about Zoda's Revenge. But hey, really cool that it's here. I am tempted to put it here because it's kind of like, it does feel like it gets the brownie points because it's a Nintendo release. And hey, Nintendo made this system, so it's just like, obviously, they can put whatever games they want here, and because it's a Nintendo published game, they obviously feel like, hey, we should put that on here. But I am trying to look at this as like a, hey, what makes sense in terms of the 30 best NES games. I think Star Tropics probably deserves to be in the 30 best, but I feel like there's some NES games that are missing from this list that should be here, that I'm kind of like, hey, is Star Tropics more important than them? Maybe not. I don't know, but I'll leave it here for now. Super C, that's kind of an odd one. As good as Super C is, I'm just putting it here mainly because I don't understand why the original Contra has such a hard time getting re-released. The thing is, it has been re-released. It's in the Contra Anniversary Collection, which you can get on like the Nintendo Switch and PS4 and all that. And yeah, the original Contra for NES is on there, and Contra for NES is obviously the more iconic game. Super C may be better, so it's just like, hey, why am I putting it down here? It's mainly down to the fact that it's just like, I don't understand why they don't just include Contra in here. I assume there's probably like a legal problem back in the day, but I don't think there was. Contra 4 on the DS included the original Contra on NES as like a bonus. And that was released in like, what, 2007? And the original Contra for NES never released on like the Wii Virtual Console. So like that was like strike one. Never released on like the Wii U or 3DS Virtual Console. Didn't release in the NES Classic Edition. But it finally released in the Contra Anniversary Collection. I don't understand this. Mario 1, 2, 3... obviously. Tecmo Bowl, big one right there. I think, like, including Tecmo Bowl is great. This just has, like, this amazing variety, this great, just full look at everything the NES had to offer. And, of course, we ended off with The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2. I like it how Nintendo kind of went against alphabetical order, just kind of putting Zelda at the end there, even if it begins with L. Out of the 30, these are like the only ones that I find to be a little questionable. Like I think Super C and Balloon Fight are great games. And, Galaga and Pac-Man are classics. Castlevania 2 has its fans. Those are like the questionable ones, as in like I'm kind of like could have included other games, or these ones feel like they might not fit as like, oh man, the best NES games of all time. I think the big one that's missing is obviously Tetris. I think Nintendo's kind of weird with like Tetris sometimes, where Tetris played a huge part in the original Game Boy and NES's libraries. And, obviously you have to go through the Tetris company to license it now. But the thing is, like, Sega did that. The Sega Genesis Mini included Tetris as a built-in game. And Tetris never even released for that damn console. It was like a bonus game they included. Tetris was being developed for the Sega Genesis and they, never released, but they finally put it out in the Sega Genesis Mini. And so it's just like they didn't have to do it, but they went through the trouble of licensing Tetris from the Tetris company, and Nintendo didn't do that. And the NES is the NES actually got Tetris, and it was a big deal. But the fact that there's only like a couple games here that I think are somewhat questionable, and there's only a few games that I'm like, oh man, you should have included that. That is impressive. That shows that they really cared. Nintendo really could have just included like 30 of their own games. You know, they released a ton of stuff for the NES that they could have just included at, you know, no extra cost. And they could have included Urban Champion, tennis, volleyball. But no, they went for the best of the best. And they went to all these different companies, you know, Square, who owns Final Fantasy, Capcom, who owns Mega Man, Tecmo, who owns Ninja Gaiden, Konami, Castlevania. And they went to all of them and they asked them, hey, can we put your games on the NES Classic Edition? And that just shows how much they actually cared about making a great product. And I think that was really awesome. That got me excited about this thing. That showed to me that this isn't just some like cheapo thing that Nintendo just farted out to make a quick buck. You know, they might have originally thought of it as that, but they put a ton of love and attention into this thing. And I think a lot of people noticed because this thing was impossible to get. Nintendo was like putting out trailers and, you know, overviews and, you know, showing like game journalists and reviewers the console before its release in November of 2016. But pre-orders never went up. People had to go to like the midnight launch or like, you know, the early morning launch, waiting in line to get this thing. The NES. I'm like, I own most of these games on my Wii U, and I was just like, oh god, I gotta have it. And that just kind of makes me think, it's just like, what is with these mini consoles, man? Like, what makes them so cool? Like, we can play most of these games already, especially NES games. I mean, NES games are re-released like every single like millisecond. What is it about these damn mini consoles that's just like, oh god, we gotta have it? I mean, like, yeah, the $60, that's a steal. That's like $2 per game, and you get a cute little mini console and an authentic controller. That's another thing. It's just like you get to play it with like an actual NES controller, and it has HDMI and it's accessible because you can just walk into a store and buy it, you think. But no, they never opened up pre-orders. You had to be there to get one, you know, like you had to be the first there. And like scalpers would show up, they would just buy out NES Classic Editions and they sell them on eBay for like hundreds of dollars. And it was like, you couldn't get one of these things. And months later, Nintendo announced like, yeah, we're done with that, we're discontinuing this. What? They were like, yeah, we're only planning for this to be like a little fun product for the holiday. And then they were like, yep, and then after that, we're done. I never understood that because like, there were so many accessories for this thing. It only came with one controller. You could buy a second controller separately for only $10. That was like, whoa, $10? Jesus, it's a cheap-ass price because these controllers also have like numerous applications, which is crazy. But like third parties were making accessories, officially licensed accessories, you know, carrying cases. There was a book right here, Playing with Power, Nintendo NES Classics. Now, this wasn't really specifically for the NES Classic Edition. This launched right alongside the NES Classic Edition, but this kind of felt like just kind of fate that it came out on that same day. Because this isn't really, like, I don't actually think this references the NES Classic Edition at all. It's kind of just like a compilation of a bunch of different like strategy guides from like Nintendo Power. Like it only includes the first party Nintendo releases, and you know, all of these were actually games included in the NES Classic Edition. So yeah, I assume this was created as a way, you know, as like a strategy guide, you know, dual release alongside the NES Classic Edition. But they just didn't want to, you know, go to the third parties and ask them like, hey, can we get the rights to like put strategy guides for your games in here? Like maybe that was the case. So then they were like, all right, well, we're not gonna make this an NES Classic Edition strategy guide. We're just gonna make this like a nostalgia like strategy guide thing. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in this book. Like just seeing like these pictures, like this, you know, this display showing Rob in the NES in this giant, you know, store display is incredible. And seeing like all these like designs of the NES control, you know, like just seeing the inside of these things and just seeing like design documents, it's just really damn cool. And just seeing like, oh man, all the games available at launch, or, you know, Super Mario Brothers, that didn't actually come out at launch. You know, there's some conflicting sources on that, but still. But then so much of this book is just taken up by like all these like strategy guides for like these old ass NES games. And like, this is like really well put together. Like, this looks really damn nice. But I don't really care about strategy guides for like Ice Climber and whatnot. Like, a few little strategy guide parts would be fine. But, you know, I much prefer this. Like, even if it was just like just straight up scans from Nintendo Power, I think that's way more cool. But it's just like, they just show you like a little bit of it. And that's like one of my biggest problems with a lot of like Nintendo booklets. That was my problem with the original Super Mario All-Stars 25th Anniversary Edition. A little history book included on that Wii re-release special edition. Like, they would just show you little snippets of like Mario design documents and memorabilia and interviews with the designers and creators and all that stuff. And I'm like, oh, please, like, give me more. Like, I would prefer this, where it just shows you, like, oh, man, like, this is, like, stuff from the early days of the NES. They include Popeye, Gumshoe. And, like, I would love if the whole book was just stuff like this, but then it just moves right on to, like, oh, man, do you want to know how to be a pro at balloon fight? Fucking dumb, but not right now, because I want to see more of this stuff. But the design of this book is quite nice. Just seeing, like, oh, man, little, you know, instruction manual for, like, Donkey Kong Classics there. Even if it's a little, like, it's not like the greatest quality scan, but you know, hey, like the at least the composition is nice. And even then, a lot of these screenshots, these weren't taken from the NES Classic Edition, because as I'll talk about, the video quality was great in that these look like they were just captured off of like an old school TV. And it's not even that consistent. Like, these screenshots look like they were taken from the NES Classic Edition, but then we go on to like these screenshots, and these are super blurry. Then after the Donkey Kong Jr. strategy guide, we have like an inside look at game packs, and they have all this like tech information on how NES games worked. And it's just like, this stuff is way more interesting than this stuff. So yeah, I gotta be honest, I mainly bought this on Amazon back in like 2016, 2017, mainly because the cover and the way the book looked, because it's just like, you know, the hardcover version comes with this slip cover that looks like an NES game cartridge. I mainly bought it for that reason. I thought that looked really nice. So it's just like, to that extent, like, yeah, it's great. But man, like, I like this. I just like seeing like, oh man, look at all of this. They mentioned Tetris here. They mentioned Faxanadu, and Short Order and Eggsplode. Come on. As it stands, playing with Power Nintendo NES Classics is a cool compilation of like old strategy guides and whatnot. Because like, we can just look at like, yeah, they just include all this stuff from like, you know, the Super Mario Brothers 3 strategy guide, which is awesome. Just these full art spreads. That's great. But overall, you know, I just wish it was kind of more like a coffee table retrospective book for the NES. If they weren't going to go like the full-blown NES Classic Edition strategy guide. Because like I said, it doesn't even include all the games. It just mainly focuses on the Nintendo published ones. But getting back on track, this showed that Nintendo was very serious about the NES Classic Edition being this big new product for them. They even did a big old hotline. Back during the NES days, you could call the Nintendo Power hotline for advice or just some tips on how to get through a tough part in a game you're in. And Nintendo brought back the hotline number just for like a couple days during the launch of the NES Classic Edition. And there weren't actually like any people on the other end. They would just play like a recording for you, but that was still kind of cute. But yeah, they were pretty serious about like this being like a big launch and a big deal. And it definitely was. Like, people that didn't even know the Wii U existed were lining up to pick this up. You know, people that were like, oh my god, you know, I remember that NES, I'm gonna get one. People that didn't actually realize that you could download these games on your Wii and Wii U and 3DS. You know, hey, this strategy worked. You walk into a store, you see a Wii U, you're not gonna immediately think like, oh, I'm gonna download Star Tropics. No, you walk into the store and you see this, you're gonna be like, oh my god, I remember the NES. it was perfect, and Nintendo knew that. And I think this was a great thing to launch right before the Nintendo Switch. You know, this kind of got Nintendo back in everybody's minds, especially after Pokemon Go was such a sensation that summer of 2016. You know, that got people back into Pokemon, and they started remembering Nintendo existed again. And the NES Classic Edition kind of built on top of that. And then leading into the Nintendo Switch launch, I think this little guy, you know, while it wasn't directly responsible for the Nintendo Switch's success, I think it played a role in people kind of paying attention to the system, at least during its launch. And I remember getting mine on Best Buy online. I remember just driving home from like work one day and just seeing like on my phone notification popped up because I would have like Nintendo news sites on Twitter notifications on like whenever they tweet. Yep, I'm one of those guys. But I remember seeing like it's just like NES Classic Edition up on Best Buy, so I just pulled over to a gas station and I bought it on my phone and bam, got it. I think I got mine before they announced they were discontinued, so I was pretty happy about that. And yeah, I played this a good bit. Even if I already owned many of these games, this was just a much more fun way of playing them. This little mini console itself was a very high quality feeling interpretation of the original system, much better than any mini console we've seen up to this point. Most of them kind of like went for a general vibe of how the original console looked, but didn't try to go one-to-one. This obviously isn't like one-to-one because the controller ports are much different, but it's still like definitely close enough to be shelf-worthy of being like, man, I love the NES. Look what I have on my bookshelf. But those controller ports are different because the controller uses the Wii Nunchuck port, meaning you can plug this into a Wii remote and then you can use this for Wii games that support the classic controller and more specifically virtual console games on the Wii and Wii U, meaning you know, you could just plug this in and play NES games on your Wii U or Wii with, you know, the closest thing to an actual NES controller. An NES controller. This works in some games that use like the classic controller on Wii and Wii U, but you know, it's not perfect because, you know, those games have to only use BA, start, select, and a D-pad. If they need any buttons other than that, you're kind of boned. But the fact that you can use an NES controller in a lot of games like that is really fun. The fact that Nintendo released this and made it compatible with you know, Wii controllers, I think is great. You can also this also accepts like the Wii Classic controllers, which is also very nice. And just snapping it in, you know, it stays in very snug. You know, I think it was great that they used that. But the main complaint people had about this this controller setup, well, that's embarrassing. Yeah, the controller cord is embarrassingly short. This was the main point of criticism with this console. I don't know if Nintendo actually ever gave like a full-on response as to why they made the controller wire so short. You know, was it a cost thing? Was it just a design, like conscious design choice? Because, you know, maybe they were thinking like, oh, this forces you to sit close to the TV, almost as if you were a kid in the 80s, you know, sitting on your butt on, you know, like right next to the old tube TV playing NES, you know, forcing you to sit on the floor or something. Like, I don't know. I think that's a very flawed way of thinking of it. It's just like, if you want to sit on your ass and playing NES games, you have the choice to do so. Why force everybody to do it? You know, because like, you know, this uses HDMI, and so many people have very specific TV setups where it's just like maybe a lot of their consoles maybe plugged in, you know, behind them, and their TV is in front, and they, you know, wire things through the wall or something. So it's just like, you know, like forcing them to kind of like, you know, just have this plugged in a specific way and being so close to the NES, I think is ridiculous. Oh, I forgot. Probably why they did this was so then you could access the power and reset buttons, because the reset button is integral to, it's pretty much the home button for the NES Classic Edition. You hit the reset button to go back home to the menu. So, yep, that's worth it. I guess they didn't want to change the controller. I guess they didn't want to add any any extra buttons to the controller because that would make it a completely flawed experience. It wouldn't be true to the original NES. Bro, the front of the system looks unfinished with these controller ports, and you're forcing me to sit this close just so then it's just like, oh, well, we don't want to add anything to the controller. At least like a button combination where it's just like, oh, hold everything all at once or something to go back home or something. I don't know. But yeah, that was the main complaint. But other than that, it's kind of hard to find a ton of things to complain about with this system. I think the game lineup is near perfect for what it's supposed to be. You know, a 30-game representation of everything the NES had to offer. There's only a couple games I would really kind of contest being here. Pretty much, this is the definitive 30-game NES list. The menu is incredible. Like, one of my favorite little tunes Nintendo ever composed is the menu theme for the NES Classic Edition. It is like this perfect representation of just like kind of like thumbing through the NES library. It's so happy and it's so catchy and I love it. The emulation is incredible on this thing. It's so beautiful. It looks so damn good. And I think what makes it so impressive is Nintendo absolutely fucking stunk at emulation for NES games before this. NES games on Wii U look disgusting. They're washed out, dark, blurry, like, blah! NES games on the NES Classic Edition are crisp. They pop. The colors are all beautiful. It's wonderful. That's why, like, this is such a fun way to play the games, is the fact that you get to use an authentic NES controller and get to play the games in such a good way. They look wonderful on this device. There's only a couple of like display settings, unfortunately. You can do like, 4x3 and then pixel perfect mode, which that means like the games were originally designed in a way where it's just like, you know, in a format that isn't 4x3, it's a little smaller than that. So Pixel Perfect kind of like displays the game at the resolution that the developers developed the game at. The official release would be a little stretched to 4x3. And then you have the CRT mode. I don't know why anybody ever like uses CRT modes. I get it. It's kind of like, that's cute, but so many like compilations and re-releases like this have a CRT mode. And I think it's cool to have there, but like, I never see anybody use it. Like, it's like, cool, I get to play the game as it would look playing on an old ass TV, but it's something where it's just like, I think the people that would really appreciate a CRT mode are the people that already have a CRT and they have like the best way to play these games, blah, 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 blah. Like they are these true enthusiasts that wouldn't even want a device like this. That's me generalizing, you know, obviously, you know, I think a lot of people do like the CRT modes and, you know, even enthusiasts, I think there's a lot of enthusiasts that really appreciate and really love playing on these things. And yeah, when I say these things, you know, I'm saying this thing started a revolution. Whether that's good or bad, and you decide. I think this was an awesome little one-time release for Nintendo. But it kind of opened up the floodgates because all these other companies started doing their own mini consoles. You know, PlayStation, TurboGrafx, Sega Genesis. It just opened up everything. And it kind of made me go, it's just like, I think the mini console craze kind of like initially started with the NES Classic Edition, even though there was stuff before this. And then immediately like burnt out. And then after Nintendo went in for a second time, which we'll talk about, you know, their second attempt with the SNES Classic Edition. After that, so many other consoles came out, and I think the market kind of died. There were too many of these things, and it just kind of makes me think it's just like, you know, do we really need a mini console for everything? These are really cool, but it's just like after like a couple hours of playing it, I kind of just throw it in a sock drawer and never play it again. But hey, you know, I buy so many of these things because they're just really cool, and I think Nintendo did an amazing job with the NES Classic Edition. Obviously, it had some weak points, but overall, this was awesome. It definitely made 2016 a lot more interesting. 2016 may have been pretty horrible in terms of games as a Nintendo fan, but it was far from a not interesting year. And the NES Classic Edition made it as interesting as it was. And thankfully, Nintendo realized how many people were interested in this thing. They went back on their discontinuation announcement and, you know, they produced some more of these things. And that's great. I wish they did a couple more of these, but as I said, I think the market kind of burnt out. And, you know, I think most people would kind of just prefer playing a lot of these games on their Nintendo Switch instead of buying a, you know, $60, $70, $80 piece of plastic with 30 games built in, you know, that they'd play for a little bit and then be like, all right, I'm done, and just, you know, throw it in the closet. But this kind of keeps that feeling of like playing on the actual console with the actual controller, even though it's far from that. It's like this little fucking mouse-sized version of the console, but playing with the original controller, or at least, you know, an authentic replication of the original controller, does really add so much to this experience. And the craziness that surrounded just trying to get one of these things, and, you know, getting one of these things, you know, right before the Nintendo Switch released, and just the excitement around finally, like, oh man, it's exciting to be a Nintendo fan again. The NES Classic Edition adds to that, and I'm always going to appreciate it for that. And not the size of this fucking thing.